This week we're going to talk about ideas, but we're going to start in a particular place before we move into it. 1996 is where we're going to start. Does anyone remember 1996? A few, quite young. A few hands up the back. Any memorable events? I looked it up today. I wrote a few things out. Nintendo released the 64. Atlanta Olympics. There was a election in Australia with John Howard becoming Prime Minister for the first time. And it was also the year that this particular thing happened, which was very, very critical in terms of business. It was this company called Webvan.com, which was founded. Has anyone heard of Webvan before? Yeah, a few people. Luke. Webvan was founded that year, and it actually went on to become the most spectacular business failure in internet business history. Okay, great failure, one that we'll talk about today. They were using this thing called the internet at the time to deliver groceries. They considered the idea that the internet was growing. There was a lot of people starting to get connected to the internet, and then they also realised that most people needed groceries to live. So they combined the two and created this massive business to do so. They set up this massive infrastructure of distribution centres, as well as fleets of trucks and vans to deliver the produce, and grocery stores to provide the goods to. This idea, whilst relatively useful, was a big, big failure. In the space of a few years, Webvan spent $800 million on this idea, establishing the distribution centres, the delivery infrastructure, and extensive high-profile marketing, including things like the Super Bowl. They had a few advertisements for the Super Bowl. After all this was done, they found out that no one actually wanted to use their particular product. So this is what we're talking about, ideas, and it's been a great case study in entrepreneurial failure. These are the things that they didn't actually do. They didn't find out whether there was any customer demand for their product before they started building their idea. They didn't test even what types of groceries customers wanted to buy online and were available online. They just decided to set up the entire grocery store. They didn't offer a small range of products for a specific audience. They were instead offering groceries to everyone. And they didn't move slowly until they worked out that their model actually worked. Webvan was a relatively thoughtful idea that was a terrible opportunity. And that's the kind of concepts that we're going to discuss today in respect to your ideas and how you can actually identify a bad idea from a good one. Last week we introduced ideas, and we did so with reference to a particular concept. We talked about the ideas as looking for problems and solutions. And this week we're going to extend beyond that to look at a few other ideas. For you guys, this is going to be a bit of a workshop-based process today. Rather than me talking a lot, instead you're going to be working through a few things in order to help you get ideas and evaluate your ideas, because essentially that's what you guys are doing at this point. How do you recognise an opportunity from an idea, and how do you recognise a good idea from a bad one? These are the concepts that are critical and what we'll be covering through the lecture. I guess the conclusion we'll start with is this. It's very, very difficult to assess an idea at an early stage. There are a lot of ideas that change over time, and we have this implicit notion, for the most part, that either ideas are binary. They're either like good or bad. You know, you can hear an idea and you think, hey, that's a good idea, or hear an idea and you think, hey, that's a terrible idea. But if you look closely at the history of ideas, as we started to discuss last week, often ideas are dynamic, and it's contextual whether they actually become a good idea or not. And there's some great examples of that. A lot of good-sounding ideas end up being terrible ones, and Webvan is a classic example of that, which is a relatively straightforward or useful idea, but in the context of that time was a failure. And then there are others that the opposite, that sound like terrible ideas, but end up being great opportunities. Webvan, if you think about why they got $800 million of investment at the time, it was because of things like this. The internet was growing. It was growing at a rapid rate and set to expand quickly. There was clearly a market need for groceries. Everyone on the planet needs to eat and buys groceries each week. There was almost no competition on the internet at the time to buy groceries. And for those reasons, Webvan was able to convince institutional investors, investors more generally, to invest $800 million in that idea. But that ended up being a failed idea, largely because there was no market demand for it. Here's the opposite. A really average-sounding idea that ends up being a really big success. And Airbnb is probably the best, or one of the most modern examples of that too. Airbnb sounded like a terrible idea at first. Let strangers into your house, treat your house like a hotel, risk them taking your own personal property, and there were so many hotels in the marketplace already. For these reasons, it wasn't really clear that Airbnb was a good idea. Joe Gebbia, one of the founders of Airbnb, for example, says that on the first night that someone came and stayed at his house, he woke up 2 or 3 times worried that there was like a serial killer in the kitchen. Okay, strange idea and strange behaviour. And that's kind of reflected in what happened with Airbnb over their first few years. It was 2 years before Airbnb really got any traction with their idea. For 2 years, they were trying to convince people that this was supposed to happen, and the world at large wasn't responding. So much so that one of their co-founders actually quit and moved back to Boston looking for other projects. So for the first 2 or 3 years of their life, it was not entirely obvious that they had a good idea. Also reflected in what happened when they were trying to get investment. Brian Chesky, one of the founders of Airbnb, recently gave a few insights into what happened in those early years. He said that he sent out an email looking for investment. We were attempting to raise $150,000 from investors. They sent out an email to 7 investors, and 5 of them declined, and the other 2 didn't respond. That 10% of Airbnb you could have bought for $150,000. That 10% today is worth over $3 billion. And there's some great email exchanges from those early investors like Fred Wilson, who passed up on this opportunity, who describes how hard it was to look at that idea at the time and how unlikely it looked like it was going to work. So when we think about ideas, they're not binary. Really great ideas can emerge over time, and really bad ones that sound terrible now may be the source of that success. And in this workshop, we're going to run through those ideas and trying to give you more of a framework for what to think about in terms of assessment, rather than just saying, hey, that's a good idea, or that's a bad idea. So what should you focus on instead of these things? Trying to say, hey, I've got a good idea. I'm going to give a framework for this, and we're going to run through these 6 criteria today in a worksheet where you guys are going to be working in teams, and we're going to come around and give you some feedback about these particular issues. And we're going to focus on this concept of problems and solutions. So the first thing is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And can you actually find out whether it's an actual problem for people rather than that concept of Paul Graham's where it was made up problems? Secondly, we talk about target market and who are the users of your product, and can you actually identify them and go out and talk to them, which is something that we'll start to really focus on in the weeks ahead. Third, switching to the technology side of things, what type of solution are you going to build and how are you going to build it? Not necessarily just, hey, I've got this problem, but again, when we discussed it last week, great products are problems and solutions together, not one or the other. Fourth, talking about competition and largely what exists in the marketplace and how you can respond to those things and make them, or either make an idea that responds to that or break some new ground in respect to competition. And then the other final thing for today is how this thing fits or how your idea fits with your team, whether you have the skills and characteristics of your team to capitalise on it, whether you have some particular insight or background that allows you to work things out that other people aren't or don't understand. Those are the things that we're going to discuss today, but before we do it, we're going to hear from our guest speaker today, John Sung from Makers Empire. And Makers Empire is a 3D printing company based in Adelaide, and they're probably one of the most progressive and dynamic young companies in... John's laughing, you shouldn't be laughing, but we're going to hear from him, and he's going to run through these criteria too as we run through it over the workshop, so you can hear from him about these different criteria as we go.
As Matt said, we're a 3D design printing company. We make CAD software that is designed for little kids, so primary school students, to be able to design their own objects to be 3D printed. Makers Empire started about 3 years ago, and there's a group of us, there's 4 co-founders. Actually, I think we all went to Adelaide University some years ago, and got to know each other then. But then 3 years ago, I think everyone had kind of had enough of working, wanted to have a go at doing something new and different. And one of the co-founders had an engineering degree and had been programming up some technology around 3D design and 3D printing. And he got us together and said, do you guys want to have a go at making this into a company? And so we applied for an accelerator in Adelaide. It was called ANZ Innovise Start. At that time, 3 years ago, there weren't too many accelerators around. Now there's a lot more. But we went through that process, and that helped us build Makers Empire up. And we're actually more about education on what we need to do, and how to raise money and what the technology needs to look like, probably similar to the course that you're doing at the moment. But after that period, which was the first 3 months of our existence, we had a very, very early prototype that we were able to take out, and one of the things we had was trying to figure out where we should take our prototype, and we took it to lots of different places. We took it to skate parks to see if people wanted to make 3D print skateboards. We took it to kids to see if they wanted to make stickers, and we took it to schools to see if teachers were interested in it. And we ended up going with the schools and education because we saw the most interest from teachers and students. At the same time, over the last 3 years, there seems to have been a big kind of shift or push towards STEM education, which is what our product kind of works with, and we've got a lot of tailwind with that, and it took about a year for the product to actually be decent enough. We in the first 6 months we were able to actually sell it to some really, I guess, kind schools who kind of maybe took pity on us a bit for us continually going out there and talking to them. But after about a year, we kind of got a product that was okay, and over the last 2 years we've been really hard at work trying to make the product as good as it can be. We've still got some way to go, but we have built out our team and trying to balance the competing interests of the sales team and the product team and our learning team, and building something of value that people actually want and schools will actually use has been the real challenge. Today we're just working on Pulteney Street, so literally 5-minute walk from here, and we have a few people overseas as well. And that's about it. Our main focus at the moment is still primary schools, but not just the technology, which is the 3D design software, but also a lot of the training that goes around that. We realised pretty early on that teachers would actually need to know how to use it for them to go on and teach it. So a big part of our focus is on that.
We're going to start with the first and most probably important thing, which is what is the problem that you're trying to solve, as well as how do you know it's an actual real problem. Both critical things, probably the most important things that an entrepreneur needs to do. You've got to solve problems that people actually have in order to be successful. Remember we discussed last week that the major cause of failure for businesses is the fact that they've created a product that no one actually wants. So very critical thing to do. Most important part of what a startup's journey is characterised by their success in respect to this measure. But it's tougher than it seems at times to recognise a problem that people actually want to be solved. We've been talking about it like it's quite easy to do. In some cases it is. It comes down to some particular insight. But if you look through history, there are many examples of great ideas that haven't necessarily led to success. Thanks. And some good ones that we're going to talk about. So history's full of examples of products that have been built that don't solve a particularly effective problem or a problem at all for people. Here's some really classic examples. The first one is the QWERTY keyboard. The QWERTY keyboard is designed or optimised for mechanical typewriters, and it's been that way for a long, long time. There was a professor called August Dvorak, who recognised that once we went to PCs, etc., there's no need to organise the layout for mechanical typewriters. So they rearranged the keyboard in a particular way that was something like 19 to 50% more efficient to type. It means that you can obviously type more in a shorter amount of time. No one's actually adopted this product. And largely Dvorak found out that the reason why is largely because people have already learnt how to use the QWERTY layout or style. So adopting something else or changing behaviour wasn't necessarily easy for them to do. When we think of that, a relatively good idea that kind of addresses a problem but doesn't do so from the perspective of the end customer. Another example of this process is the Concorde airplane. It was designed as a really efficient form of travel. It's been called a technological marvel. It was designed to travel the Atlantic in half the time it takes for a 747. but the problem was that the fuel costs were 15 times as much. So when we think about the problem that they were trying to solve, engineers would start out by saying, travel is a problem, people don't like to travel, let's try and make it as fast as possible. And they spent a lot of money trying to come up with this solution to it, but they essentially focused on the wrong actual problem. This happens a lot. A classic one from Ralph Emerson was, if a person can make a better mousetrap than their neighbours, that they build their house in the woods, the world would beat a path to their door. If you think that you've got a better product than everyone else, most people think that that's what you need to win, and that's the only thing you need to win. But the world is full of examples of great products that have actually failed. And over the last 100 years, 400 or 4,000 patents have been registered globally for catching mice, and still the most successful one is the one from 1899. These are examples of people who have focused on problems, but not necessarily focused on the right problems in the right way. In each of these cases, value for the consumer was different from the one that the engineers had focused on. And kind of going back to the example of the Concorde, rather than focus on speed, the Concorde was a major failure. Instead, there have been people who have focused in on what actual customers want, which is cheap airlines, and they've been quite successful. And a range of discount airlines are a great example of that. Thomas Edison kind of captured this sentiment really quite well. Find out what the world needs, and then I proceed to invent it. You've got to kind of find out exactly what your customer and your potential customer is looking for, instead of just what's a better product or what's a better technology to start with. Probably more than other things in the course so far, but it's really because it's the most important thing. You've got to be able to solve a problem for people in order to deliver a product of value. If you can spend more time on this, it helps you down the line, rather than trying to start moving out towards engineering or building a product, etc. You've got to spend time to really work out the problem. And probably that's where I'm going to ask John. John's going to run through this worksheet the same way as you guys are. I'm going to ask him some of the issues related to Makers Empire and how they actually found this business. So, John, let's start with the first one. Do you know the problem that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, so for us, figuring out what the problem was by taking our product and going out and showing it to a few different markets and seeing which one it would stick with. And it ended up being with schools. And initially, we didn't really know what the problem was. We just knew that teachers and students, well, especially teachers, were interested in it. They were really interested in it. As it came along, as we learnt more about it, and it actually took us a long time to figure out what the problem was. The problem was that primary school teaching is changing from learning how to spell and how to do math. Like those skills and memorising where their countries are, I guess 50 years ago were kind of valuable, but nowadays everyone's got Google on their phone. You don't really need it. So what we figured out, or what we learned, was that schools are changing to having different types of things they're trying to teach. And one of the things they're trying to teach is like problem solving and collaboration, and working together and working with new tools. And it actually took us a little while to figure out that's what they were going to. And then it turns out that it's not just the innovative teachers who are thinking that, but like the Australian curriculum, which all schools have to follow, have actually codified that into it, which was, obviously everyone's heard, well, probably everyone's heard about, you have to do coding at school now. And that's really because at some government level, they push that down. But sitting right next to coding in school is design thinking in school. And so the average primary school teacher has to go out and teach design thinking, which is actually, a problem-solving technique. And a lot of people hear the term and they think, I know what design thinking is, but it's actually a pretty set methodology. So we were actually able, once we figured out that that was the problem that they were having, we were actually able to build our product more towards solving that problem.
Okay, sorry. So you've gone out and spoken to people. You weren't sitting in a room trying to come up with ideas with your co-founders, or for students at that stage trying to work out what to do, trying to find an idea. What advice would you give?
I would go and talk to people. Well, I'm a computer guy. I don't, generally like talking to people that much. But and like even now today, like in our tech team, I have to tell them every week, like we've got to go and see schools this week. Someone in the tech team every week has to go and watch students use your software. And I don't know how many people here are, software people, or write the code or the hardware part of it. But watching people use something you've made, I find like intensely like stressful, like and anxiety filled. You know, that they're going to hit a bug or someone at work, and there's like a room of 25 teachers sitting there looking at you, and it's like, just go back quickly, you know. And I just find it, I hate it and I find it horrible. But I think it's the most important thing you can do.
Okay, and what about like you focused in on one problem, like the STEM idea, or that teaching needs to change, you're going to build new tools to help them. Was that the only problem you found, or were there others related to that?
Well, that was the main problem, that teachers have to teach this stuff, or are going to have to pretty soon. And then how do they teach it? But also what we found around actually getting it into the market is that, you know, especially in Australia, teachers are professional and they can't be, you know, they do what they want. So quite a few of them can go, yeah, I know we have to do that, but I'll just do it in a few years. You know, so eventually they'll get there. So trying to figure out how to get it to them sooner and pull them towards you and make the product easy enough that they can use it is, you know, really, that's our problem now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good. We'll move on, John. Thanks. Yeah, I'll get back to you in a minute with the next bit. The second most important and clearly related to the first with the problem is the actual customer. Can you understand who your customer is and how you can actually get in contact with them? Following on from the stuff that John's already just mentioned then, you must treat with your initial ideas as a hypothesis, as an idea that you should go out and test and find information about. The more you can go out and test and talk to your customers, the better off you will be in respect to finding ideas and finding problems for them. So you must be able to identify the target market clearly. That's one thing I've seen so far in some of the ideas that have been presented in here. They're very general. They're not necessarily a specific problem for a specific market, but those are the things that count. Rather than talking about, say, I can't remember who it was, but had the idea of drop shipping last week. We're going to use Amazon to make a lot of money selling stuff online. That's fundamentally not solving a problem for anyone. You need to be able to describe the specific characteristics of the target market you are solving a problem for in order to solve the problem. Okay, and if you don't have that, it's going to be very, very difficult. So then once you've got your target market, you've got to go out and get feedback from them rather than think about your ideas as ones in a vacuum. And just, you know, to reiterate those points, you don't have to find the largest market in the world with all the people of the world in it. Instead, you're looking for something very, very specific. What type of customer and what characteristics do they have, and how can you actually address those problems that they have? A website I'd like you to look for or look at this week is a website called First Users. So it's firstusers.io, and it is a large amount of really successful companies that someone's gone through them and looked at who their first customer was for their particular businesses. And you can run through them all for a very prominent amount of companies. DoorDash was one, for example, where Stanley Tang, the founder of DoorDash, went around to a macaroon store in Palo Alto and found that they had a problem with distribution, and then spoke to over 200 interviews, or had 200 interviews with other restaurant owners to work out what the problem was in terms of distribution. It's not like he went to tell them what the problem was, he actually went to find out. And we used that term of being a detective last week. You've got to be a detective to try and find out what ideas and what problems people are actually having. Airbnb, another example of that. Whilst it sounds like they're a fully formed company with a great idea, instead, to find out whether they actually had a problem that people wanted, they had 3 or 4 people who said they were keen to list their properties. They went and stayed with them all in New York to find out what the experience was like in respect to being a resident in these particular places, as well as the opposite, being a host as well. Rather than just kind of saying, here's my ideas and the world's got to take them, but instead going out to find out what things are. I'd like you to do that now. I know it's at a formative stage with some of you, and you may have more than one idea, but this is critical to any idea that you may have. You've got to work out these questions. So let's spend a few minutes now trying to identify the characteristics of your target market and the specific details or questions that I've asked there. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess we found out by going out, once again, talk to customers. And we kind of figured out, and it took us quite a while to figure out who the target market was. And what we do is we have customer archetypes to say what each type of customer looks like. So for instance, in our case, a specific customer type would be, and we saw this early on quite often, schools that had seen 3D printers at conferences and bought them, and then hadn't even opened the box and they'd sat at their school and they were like, actually, we have no idea what we're going to do with these things. So that was a specific type of customer archetype. It was like an innovative teacher who, was impressed by the shiniest, newest gadget, wanted to be at the forefront of things, not necessarily going to stick around for the long term, but, for our first steps, they're very important. Other ones were like teachers who were not really technical at all, but really wanted to do it. So that kind of customer we knew need a lot more support. And over time, I think this is one of those things that really evolves. So we've realised that our real target now is the deputy principal. Initially, we didn't really know. We just talked to anyone at a school and hoped they'd talk to us. But what we found in our case was that deputy principals have connections with the teachers, so they know what's going on in the classrooms, but also connection with administration, so they know where the money is. Whereas if you talk to a teacher, they'll always say they've got no money, and if you talk to a principal, they'll always go, oh, it sounds good, I'll see if I can get some buy-in from some teachers. Mm-hmm. So yeah, figuring out who you want to talk to is pretty important.
And again, advice for them starting out on this process. Did you pick up the phone and go talk to people, go to schools yourself? How did you make those first steps to say, well, we've got to find out whether this idea is anything?
Yeah, I mean, we went to we all contacted our old primary schools and started there. Pretty much, I don't know, depends on your idea.
Yeah.
That'll work.
And so you went out there, met with them, talked through your idea, or did you just listen to their problems, etc.?
Yeah, we would have pitched our idea pretty much at that stage. I guess because we had a whole bunch of tech already written that we were pitching rather than trying to find a problem with nothing with a clean slate.
Yeah,
so.
Okay, all right, good. We're going to get to technology now. Yeah, we'll move on from there. So the next step is once you've actually got your kind of problem and you've identified the customer for your problem, you need to move on to there to try and think about solutions. Now, John's an example, and Makers Empire is an example of a company that started really with the solution first. They had this technology that Roland, one of their co-founders, had built, and they were looking for a particular market. So it started off with the skateboards and then onwards until they found the problem to solve. You may start from that perspective. You may have a technical idea or a particular technology that you think, hey, this could be really something. Could be a chatbot idea, 3D printing, AI, for example, and we've had a few of those already. Using those technologies, though, isn't a product. You've got to find the solution or find the problem for them if you start from that perspective. If you start from the problem, you've got to go find the solution. It's the matching between the two things that are important. And you've got to be able to look at your technology as a combination of existing technologies. Can you deliver an effective solution to the problem is ultimately the measure of how successful you will be. And to do that, your job is to construct a combination of technologies that solves the problem that you are addressing in a novel way. Right? So you've got to use the technologies that are available to you today in order to solve a problem for the target market. And you should think about your solution as a combination of these technologies that have been configured in a way to solve the problem. Remember when we spoke about the iPod last week and we talked about the fact that this idea had been around for a long, long time? The value of the solution you can provide is dependent on the availability of the technology at any particular point in time. The IXI player, the Audio Highway and the MP-Man were all failures trying to pursue a particular idea, and then the iPod was a big success. And if you look at the technology available to each of those entrepreneurs at each time, you can see the differences in performance. So Kane Kramer, when he created his first device in 1979, it was just not possible to even create the device. Hard drives were massive and didn't have the capacity. Then the first prototypes emerged, and a 32 megabyte flash card from NEC cost $2,000. So it just wasn't possible for NEC to create a product that was useful for people at that time. Even though they've got a relatively good idea, being portable music, the availability of technology really limited their capacity. Audio Highway, the same thing. A few years later, they got it down to $300 for a 12 megabyte memory capacity. So think about this for your product. How can you use the available technologies of today in order to solve problems for people? And if you think about what the iPod did, they really didn't necessarily create too much, but instead drew together a combination of available technologies that had a particular performance in order to deliver a product of value for people. And it's the same for a lot of things. It's so common when we see a good idea that worked at one time has a long history of failure in respect to the nature and limitations of technology. Webvan, the example that we started with today, was very much the same thing. This was Webvan in 1997, trying to use Webvan in a really clunky interface with very slow upload and download speeds. This was the speed of the internet in 1998. Imagine sitting there trying to do your groceries using this speed technology. Okay, very, very slow, very long and hard to do. So when you think about the type of value that they're delivering to a customer, even though it's a generally good idea or a good concept to buy stuff over the internet, think about how frustrating it would be to sit there and wait for that to load in order to buy your groceries each week. It would be so much easier simply just to go down to the shop and use it, and buy stuff from there. So today though, we're not faced with the same technological constraints. So even though Webvan was described as one of the most spectacular failures in internet business history and business history more generally than that, if you add smartphones to that idea and fast, reliable internet, all of a sudden today, the characteristics have changed and the same idea has been very, very successful. Instacart, for example, is now a $1 billion company with massive amount of revenues doing exactly the same idea as what Webvan did in 1996. It's just that the technology available to us today allows different types of value. And they're not the only one. Amazon Fresh does this as well, Coles and Woolworths too, and there are a whole host of competition in this marketplace that are all trying to do exactly the same thing now. What made this possible and what made this valuable is the capacities of technologies of today are different to what they were in the past. And another example from last week, Luke, where are you? Yeah, you had this on Slack last week. Why can't my bus arrive on time? Now, this isn't a new problem too. During the week, I went back and did some research and found that in 1992, Beyond 2000, a TV show, had a segment on the STA Travel getting GPS in their actual buses, and it would allow you to call up the STA Travel operator who would then tell you how long the bus would take in order to until it arrives. It would also then allow you to kind of put, or they plan to at least, to put these concepts of similar to an ATM, a bus timetable thing where you would just put in your code and it would print out the bus timetable for you, and it would tell you how long you'd have to wait in order to get your particular bus. That was a problem that exists then and it exists now, but you can see the nature of the available technology changes the types of products that you use to solve it. Today, the different technologies solve that same problem. So things like the MetroMate app, which allows you to track your bus in real time, leave reminders for when to actually arrive, and identifies service disruptions. So even though this may not be the perfect or still an effective product, it's essentially showing how the same problem has been addressed with different technology over time. And your job as entrepreneurs is to try and find out what technology is possible or available to you today and construct a combinations that's useful for people to solve an actual problem. In respect to this, entrepreneurs will often ask or get asked by investors, why now? If you're pitching an idea, why is now a good time to actually create this product, and what technology has made this possible to be successful? And more generally than that, do available technology allow you to build a solution that is effective? I'd like you to focus in on this at this point with your team in respect to your idea. Switch over to the solution side. What's the technology you're going to use? Why is this technology useful today? What has made this technology possible in terms of performance that previously wasn't available? Okay, spend a few minutes on that, please. You think about 3D printing, it's one of those big ideas. You think about the future, all of those things that's seen on the TV, the advertisements, the ideas boom and so forth. John, how did you come up with this idea of 3D printing, and what combination of technology was important for you to deliver some value?
So we'd already decided on that part of tech. I'm a computer science group, but my background is in web. So whether or not to do an app-based solution or a web-based was, still up for debate which way was the right way to go. We kind of had that decision made for us, so we set with that. On the flip side, our software relies on good 3D printing hardware, and so it's really a bet that the technology will continue, improving at a really fast rate on the hardware.
But when you think about your product though too, like it's not just the software, is it? There's so much software that's available for 3D printers and so forth. Were there any kind of, if you think about the combination idea, what was the combination of like going out to teachers? What were they asking for? Did they ask for like just we want good software? What made it work for them?
Yeah, so I guess going out to teachers, it became apparent pretty quickly that the available technology in the hardware had limited value in the consumer space. So we looked at the hardware and said, well, these 3D printers can print these things and they're like small little objects and they aren't, they're not awesome yet. I mean, they can make awesome things in like a lab for like $1,000, but that's not really much of a market yet. But at the moment, you can make these little kind of wonky plastic objects, and a kid in school who's 7 gets a whole bunch of value out of that a 25-year-old girl will not get. So we kind of looked at the available technology and thought a product built in this direction will actually have value.
What about the lesson plans, all that type of stuff? That's a technology too, isn't it? It's not necessarily just the software combined with the hardware. Teachers wanted other things to help them too.
Yeah, so we had to combine all of that to kind of scaffold in the new technology. I guess maybe that's what Apple did with their iPod. They made it so easy that anyone could use it, whereas the other products, were functionally probably pretty similar, some of those MP3 players, but without having that experience was a real differentiator.
Okay, good. All right, we'll leave it there. Yep. So we're going to move on again. The next kind of point is more of a general one, or something to look at with what makes really big, successful ideas. And it looks like you're going to be competing in a market where there is competition. There will be other companies that are out there doing something that's similar to yours or offers some alternative value. What you've got to be able to identify quite clearly is what is the value that you deliver that other people don't. And in respect to that, there's also this concept of what do you understand about a particular technology or a particular trend that's about to happen that others don't, including competitors. So many successful companies can say they have capitalized on or created a dramatic shift in consumer behavior. There's this concept of a paradigm shift from science, from Kuhn, who talks about this idea that for a long time there's a standard theory that everyone accepts, and then occasionally there is some revolution that happens where a brand new theory will emerge that disrupts or changes that particular worldview. The concept of the world is flat for a long time, a great example of that, or even that the Earth is the center of the solar system, Ptolemy's idea that we were the center of it, and then it was replaced by Copernicus, I think, who recognized that it was actually the sun that was in the center of the solar system. That's a great example of a paradigm shift in respect to science. It's the same for consumer products. What is the dramatic shift fundamentally underpinning the change that's about to happen in your kind of industry or process? What types of consumer behavior and what tools do they use now, and how will it be replaced by something entirely different? Okay, and if you think there's some really prominent examples of this driven by software technologies today. So something like Airbnb is made possible by software, where existing incumbent industries have been replaced by something dramatically new on account of some new technology. Uber with taxis as well. A taxi industry, everyone did it a certain way. Consumers were familiar with this. All of a sudden there's a new technology and there's a dramatic shift in consumer behavior that offers opportunity for some. The same with music over time. Instead of buying CDs, for example, for a long time, instead it was let's download music from the internet via things like Napster and others. And it caused, for the industry, for the record industry at least, a dramatic shift in the nature of their business and how it actually operated and how it was successful. In 1999, you can see their CD sales were massive. By 2004 or 5, it was almost all over for CDs. You've got to be able to identify, or at least successful, really great successful businesses, identify some dramatic paradigm shift in your consumer behavior or the particular industry that you're looking in. And each of those cases, in the ones that I've just described, the entrepreneurs capitalized on a powerful change, or at least being the catalyst for the powerful change themselves. And some entrepreneurs even look for those particular shifts Jeff Bezos, who created Amazon, the whole reason he started Amazon is because he was a researcher at a quant fund and found some statistics about how many new people were using the internet each day, and it was growing at this dramatic rate. And then realizing that, he then decided, well, this thing has the potential, this internet, if everyone has it, it will change a lot of how we buy things. Rather than going to physical stores, we can buy things online. And that was the start of what Amazon was, looking for a particular category where products were easy to use. So I know it's a little early for you guys to do this, but you might try and do this now. Is there a particular paradigm shift or some dramatic change that will make your idea grow larger over time in comparison to in a traditional industry or existing competition that do it a different way, who will be affected by that? Spend a few moments now, we've got 20 minutes left tonight, so we've still a bit of time. Spend a few moments now, spending 3 or 4 minutes trying to think about those big shifts and whether you have actually got an idea in a particular area or a technology in a particular area that can do that, okay? Let's hear from John now, a big technology, company of the future, seen to be progressive, all of those things. What do you think the big shift in your, or paradigm that you're capitalising on?
So I think what we realised 3 years ago when we got 3D printers, because we didn't know anything about them at that point, we'd seen all the hype that they were going to do all this stuff, but when we actually bought our first 3D printer off like Gumtree for like $500, and we kind of got it back, and it was like, this doesn't really live up to the hype that we'd kind of seen on what it was going to do. And at that point, there's a company called MakerBot who was really big in, or still is, in 3D printers. And the founder of that was on the front cover of Time magazine. And after we got a printer, it was just like, man, I don't think this is quite where they say it is. And people are going to be pretty disappointed after using it for a bit. And so we realised that within education that there was a whole bunch more value that you get besides the finished object, like all the learning and all the stuff you can teach a kid. And so we headed down that path pretty much back then. And now, like 3 years later, a bunch of those companies that are still around have kind of pivoted towards education, which I think gave us a bit of a head start, although, whether or not we have to capture it.
But so you're thinking though that 3D printers will be massive in the future, everyone will have one at home, that type of thing, or you think it's going to progress to that technology? That's the thing you're trying to capitalise on? Do you think about that type of progression?
I think they will be. I think they'll be the kind of technology that will be absolutely everywhere, like Officeworks.
Yeah.
Maybe at your home, every school will have a whole bunch. University's already got heaps of them, so they'll be everywhere. But in my head, that kind of technological breakthrough happens in fits and spurts, and you can't really time when it's going to happen. So you have to figure out what you can build today that will have some value. Yeah,
perfect. All right, great, thanks. All right, so final one for today that we're going to run through quickly is just essentially the team, and we're going to do this together. We've been talking about problems and solutions and all of those types of things that are relevant to coming up with ideas, but fundamentally the driver of this whole process is the team that you put together and what skills and capacities that you have that allows you to capitalise on either the problem or the solution or both together. So you've got to kind of ask yourself what insight or experience or advantage do you have on either the problem side of things or the solution side of things. Now, there's some of you that would be really skilled in building software, or engineers. I know we've got a lot of engineers in here. That would say to me that you've got really good skills in a particular domain of building things or using particular technologies, etc. And you would need help on the problem side of things. In contrast, there may be someone who has a really deep and burning problem that they want to solve for a particular market, and they know a lot about that. They may have worked in that particular industry for a long time. They know the customers really well. They have capacities to go out and meet those people quite easily. So really, the capacity of you guys as a team drives your performance in respect of both. And you've got to be able to identify what skills you have as a team, both in respect to technical abilities, what things, domains or disciplines do you understand or know what to use, but then more generally from that, the kind of general interest that you have in particular areas. You might like particular music or sport or things that you find interesting where you can give some insight that other people won't be able to get to. John, why do you have a team that can deliver, or how did you construct a team that can deliver?
So I guess the main thing that I've learned about teams is that I guess this is my second or third startup company, and
for me, the most important bit was diversity in the team, even though we're kind of not that diverse. But we tried, I would try doing startups before when it was just 3 tech guys, 3 engineers or programmers, just going hard at it. And you know, one of them failed definitely because all we were doing was writing code, and no one looked at the finances, no one looked at anything else except writing code, and everyone just wanted to be tech, which was a big problem. In Makers Empire, we have much different people. So we have, you know, the engineering, but we also have a learning team, sales, and business. So we have people with different skills. Is you know, for me, that's the most important part of the team.
So for students, trying to build teams, what do you suggest? Just complementary skills, look for people who you don't know or have different area skills than you?
Yeah, definitely people with different skills. I mean, I've heard that you know, there's 2 arguments to it. On one hand, if you're trying to build something really fast, it really helps if you all went to the same school and all know the same stuff, because then you don't have arguments about how your code should be formatted or how you should, you know, is Python better than Ruby or something stupid, right? That derails you. You all kind of go in the same direction really quickly. But then the flip side to that is that without the diversity, you're not going to understand the product as well as if you have people who are, you know all sorts of different things.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. Any final advice for everyone at this early stage? I know I put you on the spot. Clearly, what customers go out and learn about what people want?
Yeah, definitely I would try to build a diverse team and just go and talk to people who you think might be your customers, and don't get too wedded to the idea. You know, it's likely to change as you go.
Awesome. All right, a round of applause for John, please. A big help tonight.